Let's get started. Welcome, everybody. We've got a worldwide audience here, people from across the United States, Canada, Europe, Asia. I noticed someone from Japan who just joined us. So welcome. This is a talk I've been looking forward to having. It's right in the heart of what MedVR does. I'll give you a brief introduction to MedVR, and then we'll turn things over to Ioana Coman, who will be the moderator of Mina Fahim's talk. We are a boot camp and accelerator. MedVR spun out of the MIT Media Lab, where in a combination of projects, we ran hackathons to produce prototype projects. And we had over 300 submissions between MIT and USC, and in analyzing them, none turned into companies. We taught a lot of people about VR and XR and helped people get their first jobs, and we've built a pretty vibrant community around it. But we as a group wanted to focus on producing prototypes and products. Working with Eric von Hippel from Sloan and with Lars Riedemann from the University Hospital Heidelberg, we came up with a model that we needed a longer period of time than a typical 5-day hackathon, and needed to support the projects, the best projects after they left the boot camp. So that's how we got where we are. We teach the interdisciplinary art of medical XR innovation. We precipitate new medical XR prototypes and we accelerate viable projects. So a little bit of housekeeping here. We have extra time at the end. If there's a lot of good questions, we can continue past the hour. So that's it's an incentive to listen carefully as to what you want to learn from this. You'll note that down at the bottom of your screen that there's both a chat box and a Q&A. The chat box is for the people here all to communicate with one another. The Q&A is where you enter your questions that Ioana will review and moderate. And it's important if you can not mix them up. That would be a big help. So at this point, I'd like to introduce Ioana. We really like to have people with domain experiences, with deep domain experience as moderators, because it really brings out the best in the talks, whether it's asking questions or understanding the questions that people are asking. Ioana lives in Syracuse, New York area, and for the last 20+ years, she has combined her love for teaching with biomedical research. As faculty, she's been teaching courses in algorithms, discrete mathematics, database management systems and applications, image processing, and machine learning. In collaboration with physicians, medical physicists, scientists, and students, she has been working on research problems in multimodal 3D image fusion for breast cancer diagnosis, diagnosis, multimodality psychiatric neuroimaging, and biomarker analysis solutions for complex diseases based on machine learning. Ioana is an associate professor at SUNY Oswego Department of Computer Science. This year, she's on sabbatical at SUNY Upstate Medical University in the Division of Rheumatology within the Department of Medicine. Outside of work, Ioana enjoys spending time with her family and friends and being involved with her church and other nonprofit organizations. And with that, it's up to you, Ioana.
Welcome, everybody. I'm glad to be here. And actually, I'm looking forward listening to Mina's talk. Mina actually lives in Minnesota, so we are all over the United States with his wonderful wife, Monica, and their little boy, Theo, and they have a puppy, Teddy. He has a background in cardiovascular radiology, orthopedics, and diagnostic medical device leadership. Also product development and commercialization. Throughout the years, he has worked at Medtronic, Abbott, Beckman Coulter, Excellent, and now serves as CEO and president of MediView, where they leverage actually augmented reality and artificial intelligence to simplify, democratize, and inform healthcare delivery. Together with some incredible partners, Mina is a serial entrepreneur in the medtech and fintech spaces. He approaches his life with a foundation of trust, team, transparency, and track record to encourage collaboration and innovation focused on advancing people's everyday lives. Outside of work, Mina works with a number of nonprofit organizations and his church focused on medical, social, and spiritual services and missions. He enjoys biking, basketball, traveling, and spending time with his family and friends. And without too much introduction, I look forward to Mina's talk on successful medical XR products, wisdom in the voice of customer. And now I'm going to turn the mic to Mina, and I look forward to hear your talk and the questions from everybody else.
Thank you, Ioana and Steve, for the very kind introduction. It's very nice to be on with everybody. It's truly an honor to get a chance to talk with MedVR and all the participants. So thank you for having me on. Really excited to share the story about MediView and really align it with the goals where, especially the one around teaching the interdisciplinary and multifunctional efforts to create XR solutions. That is very much the approach that MediView takes, and at its core, and is actually where I am today. So forgive me, by the way, I'm tethering from my phone from my internet, so if it's glitchy, please forgive me. But we're actually visiting a potential customer, and I'll actually share the reason why we're down here and how it actually contributes to today's talk. So very timely. We're down here in Houston, Texas, visiting one of the key healthcare facilities here. So let me know, please, Ioana, if just want to make sure you can see my screen.
Yes.
Okay, okay, excellent. So I won't spend too much time today talking about MediView's technology or solution specifically, but really when Steve and Ioana and the team were deciding what today's discussion would be around is truly at the core of building and developing successful medical XR products is the wisdom of voice of customer. And this image right here is everything that MediView is. And just as a brief introduction, MediView gives clinicians X-ray vision for minimally invasive surgical procedures. So imagine if you took the combined powers of Superman with his X-ray vision and Tony Stark and his ability to interact with Jarvis with holograms, and actually empowered clinicians with that capability to better serve their patients. That is what MediView does. So, but how we got here and the journey really is in big thanks to our customers, our partners, and the voice of the customer that we have the privilege of interacting with on a day-to-day basis. So we'll dive into that. I'm excited to share our story, excited to hear what questions may come about from it. And this is the perspective that our entire cross-functional multidisciplinary team takes into how do we deliver a product that delights our customer and actually fills a need that they have. So just to start, I think it's really important to have a perspective of humility in the sense of XR is new. And it's important to remember that it's definitely less than 5% of the world's population has even put an augmented reality headset on. And so when you start trying to describe what XR is, it's like you're telling someone that's ever only seen or used a rotary phone what an iPhone 13, or I guess 13, 14, there's the Apple days today, right? The new iPhone 14 is, and that change is hard. And so helping ease that transition to encourage adoption is absolutely critical. And just as another example, even the things that maybe feel or sound the same are actually different, right? So when you think about what it takes to start using a new type of technology or using a new approach to something, and where we as creators and product development folks and commercialization folks believe it can go, that is not always easy. And at its core, there are three fundamentals from voice of customer that MediView uses to look at how do we deliver a successful product into the hands of our users. And first and foremost, it's acknowledging that our customers are people. And I know it's a very obvious statement, but they are driven by emotion. They are driven by what they're doing every day, what simplifies their job, and how they can do their job more effectively. That really feeds into impact, both for the end user and the end beneficiary. So, right, for us at MediView, our end user is a clinician, but the end beneficiary is a patient. And it's important to keep the impact for each of the relative stakeholders in mind as we develop new solutions. And business and why MediView is here is at its core is to serve the customers, to delight them, and to serve their needs. And sometimes that means that there's a technology push and you're serving a need in a way that hasn't been seen before. And sometimes it's around a market pull where you're really listening about what is a need that is unfulfilled today and how can we help address it. But fundamentally for us, it all starts with one concept, and that is empathy. And at its core, MediView exists to serve our end customers and our end beneficiaries. So we've got to take a step back and actually ask some very important questions. Who are we relating to? Who is the customer? And it may sound very obvious, and you may say, hey, I know who my customer is, right? But it takes a level of discipline and self-reflection to say, there may actually be more than one customer that I am trying to serve. Then is the next question. How can we serve those customers? Is it through a service? Is it through education? Is it through training? Is it through what? How can we serve them is the next question that we fundamentally ask ourselves. And then it gets even one layer deeper of which of their unmet needs are we addressing? And I think it's really important in MediView, our platform has the capability of being used head to toe for a variety of surgical applications, but we're very careful not to be everything to everyone. Rather, our first beachhead market is in the space of interventional radiology, trying to help solve the unmet needs of cancer care with biopsy and ablation, which is a very specific area to start, even though our platform can serve a variety of unmet needs across specialties. For us, it's really important that we become laser focused around delighting a key customer and their specific unmet needs. Ioana, is everyone still on the line?
Yes, we're here.
Yeah,
Okay.
everybody's here.
It looks like my connection has become unstable.
It's happened before. It usually writes itself, and if the machine learning models in Zoom decide, it will boot you off and put you back on again.
Okay, let's see if I can get it back up and running here. I'll kind of talk through, even without the slides up, how it transitions. And for us, voice of customer has a couple different approaches that various industries have leveraged, but specifically for XR technology, and I don't know, right? If someone on the call has had tremendous success putting XR into words and having it be equivalent in understanding with putting somebody in these technologies and solutions firsthand, please let me know. I'd love to learn from you and how you've been able to put words to that, because what we've observed at this point with over 500 clinician sessions of voice of customer is that putting somebody inside of these solutions is really when you start getting the reactions, perspectives, and feedback about these solutions. So hopefully you can use your imagination. As I just said, right, words are easy and pictures and holograms are better, as my picture isn't even showing up here. So I'm asking for you to use a little bit of your imagination. But for us, our key tactic that we use in voice of customer to make this tangible is actually to put, and this relates to something that Steve said early, is early versions of our solution in the hands of our end customers along the development process. And we use that for what we call formative usability. And we are an FDA regulated company. We have a class 1 and a class 2 solution that is actually pending 510(k) clearance. So we have to be careful around what we claim during those formative usability sessions, but that's exactly what they are, is they are formative, meaning they are meant to help form the definition of the solution in the hands of the user. And we actually assess very specific risk-based processes of the solution with our customers. So let me see here. Hopefully this is going to be, hopefully this comes back. Not ideal. That's okay though. Just as this is hopefully coming back to life, just to give you all an example of how we put this in practice is one of the key elements of our formative usability is actually to identify the spectrum of potential users who could benefit from the MediView solution, which then goes back to that question of who is it that you are trying to serve, and putting it down on paper and assessing, like, is this really the right customer that we are trying to serve and add value to? So as an example, today we actually were down at MD Anderson in Houston, and we have this opportunity to visit with a spectrum of users from advanced practice practitioners like nurses and PAs, all the way to the interventional radiologist who's the attending, their residents, their fellows, their training students. And for us, it's very important to observe the spectrum of use of our solution across the variety of potential end users. Because yes, while we are producing a product or a capability, we look at what are called use conditions. What is the condition or the environment or the application that the end user will be implementing our solution in? And that starts by actually putting it in the hands of the practitioners who are going to be using them. And typically, and you all probably see this in your line of work, there's some very emotional initial reactions to XR products that we find very, very funny and very interesting. But then once they get past the wow factor, the cool factor, we really start drilling down into how is this going to benefit your practice in serving patients and teaching the next generation of practitioners. So I was really hoping to be able to share this with you all, because there's some video that I want to share and how we actually gather feedback from voice of customers. So give me a second here.
Depending upon how large it is, you could send it over to me.
Let's try this. Okay. Is this working? Hello?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, there we
All
are.
right. Let's see if I can get past. Okay, so I'm going to click through this. I apologize for the technical glitches. And, this is just an example of how we look at our problem statement today. This is actually our Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Charles Martin. He, fundamentally that problem that we're addressing, that we're really going after is today for minimally invasive procedures like biopsies and ablations, we are putting a huge cognitive load on the end practitioner, the user, because they're trying to look at a fuzzy black and white 2D image, reconstruct it in their head, flip it again, and figure out what is that anatomy in 3D, how do I manipulate my instrument to get it to where it needs to go? And fundamentally, we ask ourselves this question, I can only speak for my experience, but I sure hope people aren't driving down the highway doing 80 miles an hour, 70 miles an hour, looking behind them, because that can result in very bad outcomes. Yet that is the capacity and capability of some of the tools available to practitioners today in the limitations of the current solutions. So we look at this around not the question of what can we do, but rather what should we do? And for us, yes, I'm an engineer by training. I love technology. I love coming up with unique solutions. So there's a lot that you can do, but I encourage everyone to think about the question of what should we do? And that should question for us ends up, for those of you that are familiar with what we call the jobs to be done theory, this is the core of how we develop our XR products with voice of customer. Is you have to define it in two ways. Useful to the customer, meaning it solves a problem or makes something easier in their day-to-day job. The other component is that it is digestible, that they can actually use it effectively, right? So for the customer, is it solving a problem? Is it making it easier? And can they actually use it and digest it in their world? Then you ask the question around, is it useful to business? Can we accelerate the business maturity across functions? Can we actually sell this product? Will people pay for it? What are they willing to pay for? Those are critical questions that really takes a level of humility to ask those questions of the end user and the customer of how we define what a minimally viable and useful solution is through voice of the customer. This is what we talked about a little bit earlier, where what we call formative usability. And for us, I'm probably not going to play well, I'll take a small risk here and see how it goes. So actually, it's a bad idea. I'm not going to do it. So the formative usability is very intentional. There's multiple rounds of iteration that we put something in the hand of the user. We observe them. We listen to their voice. We actually, one of the things, one of the things that we've observed is when you put something new in somebody's hands, sometimes they kind of go quiet for a little bit and they're kind of absorbing everything. And one tactic that we use is we actually make an explicit and direct ask to let us into their mind. We ask them, hey, can you please talk out loud what's going through your head? Can you please give us your thoughts out loud. That is, credit to that goes to our human factors and usability engineer, Greg Hart. He's very good at encouraging and getting that voice out of the customer while we're putting the prototypes in their hands. And we learn from those cycles. We observe them. We actually record them with their permission, of course. We record the usability. We observe how they're using the solution. And then we take that learning back and we listen to what's good and bad, and we adjust where needed. But it's very important that, especially with XR solutions, just to be a little bit repetitive, that because of how new and novel they are, to put versions of solutions in the hand of the end user. From there is actually how we derived where we started as a company. So a lot of credit to Dr. Jeff Yanoff and Carl West, who are the original inventors of the MediView solution. And when I first joined the company, this is where we started, right? The vision was, we're going to give doctors X-ray vision. But then as we started putting versions of this in the hands of our clinicians, the customer actually said, well, hold on. While we understand where this is going, we anticipate that this could take a little bit of time to get to market, and they weren't wrong because of the FDA regulations and our regulatory submissions and just development. And they started to say, a subset of your capabilities are useful today. And fundamentally, how we arrived to our Gen 1 product was actually listening and putting iterative versions of this in the hands of our users, to the point where we actually got to hearing the clinician say, one of the things that at the end of my day, I go home and my neck hurts, my back hurts, my hip hurts. And it's all because I have to contort my body in a way just to look at my medical imaging. And what we had built in was this heads-up display that was part of the technology of our full X-ray vision. And the doctor said, well, if you can bring this to market sooner as a Gen 1 product, we will use it. And we've actually seen that early adoption of that Gen 1 solution. So typically we build this slide from where we started with our product all the way to where we're going. But specifically for today's talk, I wanted to communicate that it takes a level of humility, right? And as an engineer, I say this is, we knowingly put a governor's chip or a capability restraint on what we could do versus what we should do to delight our customers. And is it a simpler solution, our Gen 1 product? Yes, it is. But it also lays the groundwork and foundation from going from the bottom left to the upper right of our product suite. And we're seeing people come on board. If you remember that very early slide of, hey, you know what? I'm starting to see what a rotary phone is, but you know what? This iPhone 14 that I see in the distance, hey, that's pretty attractive. And that transition to encourage adoption is why we're doing this. It's not that the technology wasn't ready or that it couldn't go through the regulatory process successfully. It was truly to ease the transition to a new way of working to help promote the adoption of XR solutions. And fundamentally, I don't expect anyone to remember our product names today, but that is what our Gen 1 product is. It's called the XR30, and it's a subset of the MediView capabilities. And it made XR digestible to the end user, but we also have another customer as a startup, right? For XR, especially, we use it intraoperative clinically. We always say that the MediView solution is as good as the inputs it receives. And for us, those inputs come from strategic partnerships in the imaging and the medical device space. And it actually made the concept of real-time use of XR at the point of care more digestible for our strategic partners, that led to the development of some co-development and joint go-to-market with some of the most notable names in the industry. And in the course, one that is publicly announced is GE Healthcare, and the partnership that we have with them in developing a solution, co-marketing a solution, and we have additional partnerships in those spaces in the imaging and the device space growing. That's important because it builds on that foundation of trust and belief that this technology can be used effectively to actually lead to better outcomes for patients. But that all started with building a successful customer journey as defined by the customer. Today, we were chatting with one of the interventional radiologists, and he said, listen, right, when they asked the question, how do I build a better fighter jet? They said, well, go ask the pilot. And right, as people know through Skunk Works and Lockheed Martin, that actually is how they derived some of their latest technologies. But that core of, hey, if you're looking to build something better for the customer, defining what success from the customer's perspective is the core of that, having it be digestible and the ability to adopt it. And this is very important. Today, people look at the MediView solution, they see the anatomy projected underneath the skin, and they're like, well, hold on, I can see the anatomy right there. I should be able to just guide an instrument to it. While that is the goal of where we're going, we have to be very honest with our customers around expectation setting of what can and cannot be done with the technology today, and humbly admit its limitations as well as its strengths. We are very intentional about the deployments that we can get to, and we do try to iterate quickly, right? But the iteration of the service or the product that we're putting out, again, is we actually have people on site with our customers when they're using their product in the actual ORs, watching how it's being used, listening to feedback, and we have a feedback cycle from our sales and field clinical specialists back into our development team that is very intentional. And that really helps establish users for today, but also for the future. And some of you probably struggle with this, as I do, this concept on the right where, hey, there is an opportunity here, and then you start guessing whether that's true or not, but then you realize, no, there is something here, but the later customers are not as forgiving. So the early voice of customer and listening to the wisdom in the voice of your end user actually sets the stage for those customers who are coming later in the adoption curve that expect more out of the product in order for it to be successful. This is how we look at this and why doing things early. And now we start getting something that Steve said, something that Ioana said, this concept of prototyping and early successes is very important. So whether you're talking about early prototyping or you're talking about the transition to downstream transfer to production, we look at this in three phases. People hear the term fail fast. Okay, that's great. Then you hear the term fail forward. I think we saw that with some of the most recent investments in the former founder of WeWork and the crazy $320 million investment that was made in his new apartment startup. But he definitely failed forward. And then there's the third component, which is succeed cheaper. And tying that back to today's talk around successful XR products, you have to be willing to fail. You have to be willing to fail forward. And if you're willing to take that approach, it results in cheaper and faster success moving forward. And fundamentally, this has actually been proven out empirically across a variety of industries, whether you're in the prototype phase or the production phase, that the cost of failure is lower the earlier on in the process you are. And that can be all the way from prototyping costs all the way to go to market, where if you acknowledge a liability and you observe that there's something in the field that the customer is giving you feedback on that is becoming a trend, which is a looming recall, then you have a decision to make. Do I listen to the voice that is actually showing me my patterns and trends? And a recall is not easy, right? But making that choice early before the recall comes from a ton of failures in the field has a lot of value. So wherever you are across that spectrum, whether in prototype or commercial, that perspective of timing and listening to the voice of the end users becomes very, very important. When we talk about the various voices that we look for at MediView, I talked about this a little bit earlier when the slides were down, but we look at stakeholder identification analysis very seriously. And we ask ourselves, who are the various stakeholders? And sometimes it can be a little bit overwhelming or a little bit monumental to think about. You're talking about patients, clinicians, administrators, the AMA, internal IT, which is very difficult. You have your investors that you're trying to have returns for. There are regulators that are the gatekeepers to success of your product. And then last, but definitely not least, and I wouldn't even put them last, is what about the employees inside the company? And how you identify those stakeholders and those voices and those customers, and identify how to manage expectations across the spectrum of users is critical in validating and solidifying your value to the end user. And we think about it in this way about who has interest in what we're doing as a company, as well as decision-making power for where we're headed. And that's what we call the power interest grid. And everyone only has a limited amount of time. And where you spend that time is very important. So when you think about the voice of the customer across the spectrum of stakeholders, it's important for you to allocate time appropriately for who has the interests of the company in mind and has the impact to make a difference in the success of a company, and allocate your time and resources accordingly. And this is the power interest grid is not something that I take credit for. This is in the space of commercial psychology, is a well understood and well studied approach of, there are folks that you have to manage very closely, and those that you just have to keep informed throughout a process. I'm going to skip through this a little bit since we're running a little bit behind on time. But this is how we end up actually then pulling this through into a tangible, explicit demonstration of how our voice of customer traces to our product definition. We have what is called our technology to value proposition trace. This was kind of a foreign concept to me early in my career, of make things very explicit, where you're like, well, it's there. They can see it. It should be obvious. But actually helping people figure out that 1 + 1 truly does equal 2 is very important to getting that pull through to adoption. So we actually are very explicit about what is that VOX, or the voice of customer across the spectrum, that was identified around the unmet needs that the customer is looking for. We then make a very explicit side-by-side, literally a trace, like connect the dots between the technologies, capabilities, and features, and how it traces and solves each of those unmet needs. And it truly does instill a growth mindset with our end users that, hey, while we're starting out with a Gen 1 product today, we give them a vision and a roadmap. So now we switch it around, where we actually take the voice of the customer, we echo it back to them, and we show a path to here's what is valuable today versus here's where a roadmap to success can be in the future. And it really does, again, to reiterate the importance of this, establishes a level of digestibility, trust, and partnership with the end users that at the end of the day, and I think we as creators and inventors have to really humbly admit that the success of XR products hinges on the benefits of our end users and actually promoting it. So for us, we look at championing the customer, and it is their voice that drives adoption. And that's why we continue to do these formative usability voice of customer sessions as iteratively as we can, because we know that it is the champion, which is the customer, that's going to help drive adoption for MediView, especially within XR solutions that are just new to the medical space. That really leads us to how we fulfill our vision around simplifying, democratizing, and informing healthcare delivery. And even the MediView vision was inspired from our voice of customer session, saying, what I'm really trying to do is simplify a procedure so more clinicians can perform it, so more patients can have access to it, and help me inform my decision-making in order to do that. I'm gonna pause there, and this is a video of what our solution actually looks like, but I'm gonna stop sharing just so I don't crash the system again. And there we go. So thanks, I appreciate the opportunity to kind of share how we think of voice of customer. To sum it up, it really is about identify who your stakeholders are, manage them appropriately, and have the humility to look at the problem from their eyes with a lens of empathy for what is the problem I'm actually trying to solve, and how can I and my team uniquely solve that problem.
Thank you, Mina, for the presentation. And I'll start basically asking the questions that came through in the meantime. So one of the things, and actually that's a personal question, is coming from academia, obviously we prepare the newer generation to work with your company or within your company. So my question is there a set of skills that you kind of wish the incoming young people who start working with your company will have out of college, or if they can, young people who work in some places, part-time employment, internship, so they can get prepared in working in a company like MediView?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Ioana. And, I think as an engineer, it took me too long to realize that the soft skills of product development and voice of customer were just as important as the technical skills. And, at least when I was in school, and maybe it's changed now, but as we think about those skill sets from a technical perspective, having technical emphasis in school require aspects like psychology and requiring communication courses and looking at courses around ethnographic research is very important to getting in and actually understanding the problem. Because as engineers, and I can say this because I am one, sometimes we think that we understand a problem better than the user, and we think that we know what the solution is even better than the person that's going to end up having to use it. So being able to learn the aspects of psychology that influence adoption of solutions and how to observe through ethnographic research the environments and use conditions where this work is being done is a skill set around soft skills, ethnographic research, and communication that if we can even influence one person to observe and learn those skills earlier on in their career, it's going to influence their ability to make an impact in their organizations, because it brings those perspectives from what is the problem and how can we uniquely solve it instead of a pure technical solution. And I think that's very important to look for as this space is growing, especially in XR, where the technology is just evolving, and it's important to understand how it's going to be used in the variety of use cases.
When you hire experienced software developers, sometimes you don't find them already with the experience in the medtech field. However, when you look at the software developers, designers, storytellers, what experience outside healthcare you look, and from what industries, so they seem to be attractive for you to hire them?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I'll give you a spectrum of, we have people from aerospace, we have people from entertainment, we have people from manufacturing, where XR technology has been used and has shown value. And I think in healthcare, it's important to point out that we're different than consumer, right? In some applications, not all, right? Like the training and education space is not regulated, whereas our space is. So if you look at the aerospace industry, you look at the energy industry, those are very regulated spaces and industries. So it's not necessarily that they're the same standards or the same regulations, but it's truly a mindset of, hey, this is a regulated product that has regulations around it. And I'll share this with you. I think it's important to share successes and failures. And, we actually had a hire that came from a space that didn't understand that. And really it came down to, they wanted to build unique experiences and games. And the regulation around the FDA process was too much of a burden, right? And fundamentally, that wasn't a failure on just that person or MediView. It was a failure on saying we didn't set the right expectation for what's going to be required for people working at MediView to be successful, right? And so, I take personal responsibility for that misalignment, because it's important to do that early on. So we look at that mindset that you're in this for the long haul, right? It's not a 6 month or 1 year project. It's a multi-year project. And then the other part, that's more on the technical side. And then this is very true in an area that's studied heavily in organizational development. For us, we look at the industry as two parts: organizational intelligence and organizational health. And for folks who are on the call here, I am sure there are people who are exponentially smarter than me technically and a lot of other facets. And organizational intelligence is critical. It's kind of, it's the foundation of even having the opportunity to build a unique technology, is that the domain expertise. But the other part of our company is what we call organizational health, around culture and the willingness to collaborate with your peers, even if your idea isn't the one that ends up getting chosen, or your approach to problem solving is the one that is chosen. And again, that comes down to a level of trust and humility that is a cultural consideration that we actually do screen for in our hiring process and actually reward for in our review process.
Mm-hmm. So I guess that really answers the second question I had for how MediView healthcare mission attracts and keep talent. Unless you want to add something to that.
I think, Ioana, I think the only thing I would say that is, yes, we are a startup, but we want MediView to be a place that people feel they have room to grow and to develop and to explore. So even though we are a startup, we do implement and extend an education stipend to actually do things outside of your job role that you want to explore and learn from, if it's going to help you grow personally, individually, as well as help the company. We actually do company-wide trainings on the cultural health and organizational health aspect of communication, preferences, emotional intelligence, and right, because organizational science has taught us that growth and development is actually more influenced by the organizational health and culture for retention, rather than the pure delivery of results and activities within the organization. And I think we see that in today's job market, where people leave managers and companies that don't have their interests in mind or don't explicitly talk about that, where we try to be intentional about showing and demonstrating that through action around individual growth that can help the organization and equip our employees for growth with MediView or wherever their next journey may take them.
So one of our attendees actually asks if the slides will be available later on.
Yeah, I'm happy to convert them into PDF and share them. Thank you for asking. I will just coordinate with Steve and Ioana, and I'm happy to provide those whatever distribution is most appropriate.
Alan, what has found was that there is a lack in protocols in terms of using the technology. So the nurse and doctors know how to use and when the VR with the patient. So they worked on developing protocol for using VR in dentistry, and obviously they submitted for publication. So the question he has was, what are the departments that you think are most in need for such protocols in order to enhance the patient experience and management of pain or everything that is?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I just want to take a second to think about it, because you bring up a very good point, Alan. You ask which areas are most important to develop these protocols. So in our space right now, it's important that if it's a pre-approval solution, right, then it's very important to set expectations with an IRB, like an institutional review board, for example, where a lot of these technologies are still in early use and exploration of what can and can't be done with these technologies and solutions today. That is, I think, critical. The other area is the quality department of these institutions. They look at XR as a solution that can actually help improve quality metrics across the healthcare institution. That's a key stakeholder. If you are building XR medical solutions, know that you have a critical stakeholder as the chief quality officer or the person responsible for quality metrics, and they will look at how does specific and consistent use of a solution trace to its benefits. So they will actually look for protocols and how a solution is being used in that space. And I think then the other area I would point to is in patient consent, especially if it's a pre-commercial solution for rehabilitation, if it's for mental health, if it's for intraoperative use. Patient consent is very important, and being able to demonstrate or communicate effectively and simply to a patient what they're signing up for is very important. We've actually found that that leads to a better understanding of patients, of procedures that we're actually going to be doing with them. So we'll actually put them in their XR solution, but that requires a specific protocol around exposing the patient to the solution itself. So in summary, I think the quality department is a key stakeholder around protocols. Whatever, if you're using your solution in a research capacity, setting expectations as to what those protocols are and what can and cannot be studied with them. And then the patient consent side is very important as well.
Mastane has a question on something that you mentioned during the talk, that you mentioned putting the solutions and the prototype to usability studies early on in case there is a failure. And the question he has was, is it before or after filing for IPs? And if the clinicians are actually willing to sign non-disclosure agreements?
Yeah, great question, Mustane. I mean, I wish there was like a black and white answer. It's kind of, it varies, right? I mean, we have put things in front of users before there was IP filed on them. We've also put concepts in front of our end customers that we have filed IP on. Typically, the clinician is subject to NDA and confidentiality according to their institution. And it's actually very important to point out that if you are in the healthcare space and if you are consulting with clinicians, they actually have a responsibility that if they come up with an idea that is relevant to their work while at their institution, they actually have a responsibility to file that first and foremost with potentially their innovations department or their IP group. And if it doesn't go anywhere, then they can choose to take it elsewhere. So I think it's very important to be familiar with the IP and NDA policies of clinicians relative to their institution. And we're very lucky in the type of partnerships that we've been able to cultivate with our customers and how we're able to get access to them. And that's actually through building trust with the institutions, building trust with the individuals. So we do it both pre-IP filing as well as after. And typically there's we do have what are called release forms, meaning we can use the information freely in helping inform our product development. Those are release forms, but we haven't typically had NDAs signed during our voice of customer feedback, partially because of the responsibilities they have to their institutions themselves. So I think it's really important early on, if there's one word to take away from the theme, is expectation setting around, hey, what is the expectation with this institution and these practitioners to their responsibility around novel ideas and IP.
And Misal has actually two technical questions. So he was very interested actually in your solution that projects real-time visuals from the medical devices into the augmented reality device. And so basically he's asking, how do you get that real-time data into the augmented reality device? And if you see any latency in the visualizations.
Yeah, great question. I can just give you the voice of customer that we experienced this week in our discussions. We just between yesterday and today, we were able to put our solution in front of about 14 clinicians in the span of, I don't know, yesterday we were there for 4 hours and 2 hours today. So we actually got a pretty dense spectrum. And people, we do ask that question, but a lot of the clinicians actually comment on their own that it's imperceptible latency. And I do have to give a lot of credit to our engineering and product development team, as there's been a lot of work put into reducing the latency so that when they're using fluoroscopy or ultrasound in real time, that the images are being updated in imperceptible latency to the end user. Because early on, I think it's a great point to say is that if you're moving imaging and it's like stuttering to catch up, you're not actually solving a problem, you're making it more difficult, right? The usability isn't there. So that there's a lot has gone in, and that is part of the proprietary engine that MediView has built as to how to lower that latency. And I can put it in numbers for you just because it's we actually have measured our latency to be sub 50 millisecond, which is imperceptible to the end user. So that's a lot of credit to our engineering team for accomplishing that.
Thank you very much for your presentation and actually answering all of the questions. I'm not sure if anybody else has any questions left. I give the mic back to Steve.
Oh,
Thank you, Ioana. And Steve, I appreciate the opportunity, and thank you for having me. It's truly an honor. Thank you.
oh, Mina, no, it's an honor to us. I mean, what the work that you do, we have to figure out a way to bottle it and and give it out to other interdisciplinary teams to find new applications. You know, you've got a successful product, and you've picked an area. There are so many different areas in healthcare where that same approach, the empathetic approach, the soft skills approach, converted into hard engineering to put a solution into people's hands is harder in XR than it was in mobile, and mobile was harder than web. You know, and so it's great. The work that you're doing is wonderful, and I'm sure this will be a video that that people refer to pretty regularly. Ioana, thank you for moderating. We love to have people with deep domain experience, and you certainly have that. I just want to talk for a moment about we've got a couple of talks that we're not ready to announce just yet, but we've got one in November that's interesting, and I think Mina will might oh, wrong one, meant to do this one. So that should do that. Oh, I know what that is. Okay. Okay, everybody should be able to see this. Wellness and therapeutic VR. Yeah, can you see it, Ioana?
Yes.
Good.
Mm-hmm.
Why the reason I said it would make me smile is I'm also an engineer and tend to go after the hard problems and not the therapy is a really interesting area as VR potential solutions. We will have 3 companies that will speak and compare their experience, and it's a real opportunity to bring new technology to solve some systemic problems that we have, especially in terms of the amount of mental health care that's available. So this should be a very good talk. I've heard the speakers in talk on different topics before, and they're all quite talented, and it'll be an insight that you wouldn't get without listening to people who like Mina are early to go through the experience. And on that note, I want to thank the attendees for joining us. Mina, thank you again, and Ioana, thank you again, and we'll talk soon, I'm sure.
Thank you
Thanks so
very
much. Thank you,
Take care.
Steve.